Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
I got my bags packed and on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 638. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about Hutongs, the Pants Tower, the Forbidden City, the Great Wall of China, and lots of history as we go to Beijing, China.
I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. We have a lot to cover, so let's talk about Beijing. I'd like to welcome to the show Daniel Rickleman, who is coming to us from Beijing and who has come to talk to us about Beijing. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chris. Hi.
You don't sound like someone who is originally from Beijing.
No, I'm from Australia, but after finishing university, I did a big round-the-world trip.
Which is nearly mandatory in Australia. Is that a law or something there?
Exactly. The first place I arrived was China, and I only had 2 weeks here, but the rest of the whole trip was a 7-month trip. I just couldn't stop thinking about my experience in China, and I was determined to get back here after going back to Australia. So I worked a little bit in Australia and then found my way back here for work, and I've been here a total about 7 years with a 4-year gap in the middle, and the last 3 of those 7 years has been in Beijing.
Excellent. Now, I do have to ask, and usually this comes up later on in the conversation, but with you living there, did you speak Chinese at the time you first went there? Mandarin, that is?
I had spent time in China prior to Beijing, so I did have survival level Chinese, and I know that is a big thing with people traveling to China. The language really is a difficulty. It's not widely spoken. Apart from hotels and, say, a tour guide, you just won't run into English. But there are ways around that, and the translation apps these days are very good. If you've got a map app on your phone, that helps a whole lot. There's Chinese Uber called Didi now, which makes life so much easier. I can talk a little bit more about the apps and tools that I recommend using a little later, but yeah, it's definitely doable, and I don't think you should be worried about coming to China without language.
Excellent. Well, why should someone come to China? Just to visit, first of all.
Well, first, I just want to address, whenever I meet people and tell them I live in China, the first thing they say is they step back and say, what about the pollution? That makes my heart sink, because Beijing is so much more than the headline bad pollution days, which, yes, it can be bad, but what makes the news is not typical. By definition, it is atypical because it does make the international news. The pollution has improved massively in the last 2 years. There's a huge effort to convert to natural gas in all the surrounding areas of Beijing, and it has made a big improvement. There's a pollution app. You can see the levels in pollution and around the world. It's linked up to all the pollution monitors in the world. I was looking at it this morning just before we had a call, and Beijing was actually better than most parts of San Francisco this morning. So that gives you a little bit of a sense of, the air can be bad, but a lot of the time it's great. for all the listeners, don't just imagine big dirty Beijing, because it's really not like that all the time.
I must have been there at a bad time because when I landed, you couldn't see one end of the airport from the other. Although several of the days that I was there, I didn't notice it as much. But just the one day we flew in, I was one of those days. But
that is very unfortunate, and that it can happen. Absolutely true. So why should people come to Beijing? I've got three main reasons, I feel. The first one is history. So everywhere, a lot of places have great history, but I think Beijing is special, especially in China, because if we compare it to Shanghai, Shanghai has great history you can see in the French concessions and whatnot, but Beijing's history is way older than that. So Shanghai's history is less than 200 years old. Beijing's history, I think the first walled city goes back to about 1000 BC, and the layout of the inner city around the Forbidden City dates back to the Yuan dynasty, which was the 13th century. That's Kublai Khan's grandson established that when the Mongols ruled over China. So that layout of the city and the sites you see within it date back 800 years. And through the dynasties since then, the Ming and the Qing dynasty, right up until 1911, when the Qing dynasty ended. So there's a huge amount of things to see in terms of history, but you do have the new. So just like Shanghai has the Pudong area, Shanghai has its CBD area, and I really like that area as well. I don't think people should overlook the new area. And the other reason I think Beijing is really worth seeing is being the capital. It's a fantastic window into all of Chinese culture through the museums and galleries and the food, because all of China has come to Beijing for work and to live. So you get great restaurants that represent all of Chinese cuisine. The last thing would be simply the gravity and the energy of Beijing. Being the capital and being the center of power in China, I really do feel a sense of seriousness and weight about it that other places don't have. An example always comes to mind is in Shanghai and Beijing. When you go on the subways, you need to go through a security check and put your bag through the X-ray machine. In Shanghai, you often see people push past the security guards and not put their bag through the X-ray machine, and nothing happens. I've not once seen that happen in Beijing. You know, everyone diligently puts their bag through the machine. I don't know what that means if they don't do it, but it's just a little sign of things are more serious here in a way. And that you feel that. You feel that here. So I think that's something to take away when you come here.
all right. And what kind of itinerary would you recommend for someone who had, say, a week to visit in the Beijing area?
There's all the big sites, which we can run through, but I would definitely recommend trying to mix it up a bit. So the big sites are there and you'll go and see them, but try and balance that with some more casual trips, some casual walking around to some areas. Go out to, of course, the Great Wall to get out into the hills. You might want to go to places like 798, an art district. I say that because Beijing can have a lot of traffic. The sites can be extremely crowded with Chinese tourists, and it can be a bit overwhelming. And I really wouldn't recommend trying to hit all those big sites just day after day. I'm a person that really gets temple fatigue, or you've seen one palace, you've seen them all type thing. So I'm really conscious of not trying to recommend people, you have to see all these sites. No, see a few big ones, but mix it up. And I think you'll get the best experience by doing it that way.
Okay. Well, let's get a little more specific. Where are you going to start us?
The big daddy of them all, and the one that everyone will see and should see, is the Forbidden City. So the Forbidden City is the old palace grounds and related complexes that the emperors through the dynasties lived in since Kublai Khan established the current layout in the 13th century. And all the emperors since then have lived there, have built up their own buildings within that area. So you'll go into the Forbidden City, which is called, or it's alternately called the Palace Museum. You'll be there with half of China, it feels. I hadn't been in many, many years. I thought I should just go and have a look. It was a really beautiful day. So I looked up on the website, which is really good, by the way. It's in English, has a really good overview of the complex and tells you about other displays within the complex that you might miss otherwise. But they said, try not to come between 10 and 3 to avoid the most busy part. So I thought, okay, great. I'm an early riser. I'll go at 8:30 right when it opens. So I went down at 8:30. And I couldn't believe how many people were there at 8:30. It was as full as you could ever imagine because all the big Chinese tourist groups go and see the flag raising right in front of
in Tiananmen Square?
Yeah. So they kind of go from that and then straight into the Forbidden City. So it is busy. Be prepared for that. But I will say China does something very well, and that's manage crowds. They have so many people that they get it right. So you're not lining up for a long time. And things do flow, but just expect a lot of people.
What are we going to see in the Forbidden City?
You go to Tiananmen Square, the Tiananmen Gate. So if you go on the subway, you'd get off on Tiananmen East or Tiananmen West, and then you'd walk towards the square in Tiananmen Gate, which is the famous one with Mao's portrait on. You go in through the gate, and then you'll walk along north a few hundred meters and get your ticket just to the right of the main entrance. You'll walk in there and you'll come out overlooking an expansive kind of inner courtyard with another big building in front of you, I don't know how to explain, like a temple or typical Chinese roof with yellow glaze on the top. And you'll have that expansive courtyard in front of you. You'll have canals either side of that building, which are quite beautiful in the morning when the water's just glassy, a beautiful reflection of that. These dark little canals with marble railings running around them. And then you'll continue to walk up towards the first building. You'll see throughout the complex there's some famous stone carved, I'm not sure if you call them frescoes or dragon artwork that form the center of the walkways. I'm sorry if I'm butchering the names and the history of these things.
I would probably call them reliefs.
That's the one I was thinking of.
Yep.
And then you'll continue past those buildings and through several that look quite similar. Each of them had different purposes, whether it be like a throne room or for certain ceremonies or for different functions. Off to the side of that main strip, you have smaller buildings, usually one-story buildings, which now house certain different exhibitions of clothes, emperor's clothes, furniture. When I was there was touring Buddhist sculpture from all around China, India, Kashmir, which is quite beautiful. So do check out the website and check where those things are being shown, because you could easily walk through the whole thing and not realize they're there. It's really not so crowded off to the side of the main area, so try to do that. As you move forward through the different buildings, you'll end up in a small garden, which is we've got some old like juniper trees and rock formations. That's quite pretty. And you'll end up passing out of the whole complex, out through the northern gate, which will be the end of the tour through the complex.
Well, the only thing I would add to that is, as you're coming in through the way that you did, you're coming into the ceremonial and the public, a public for the people who are visiting, officials and things like that, part of the Forbidden City. So everything is built to impress. You can tell as you're going in there that you were supposed to think, I am so little.
Absolutely.
As you get back towards that garden, you're in the private part. And I was surprised how small some of the private spaces, this is where the emperor lived and this is where his wife lived and such. And they were smaller than our house because this was not meant to impress. This is just where they lived. And you get to see both those parts. So that was the thing, one of the things that struck me.
That's a nice observation. Yeah, I didn't think of that at the time, but yeah, that rings true.
And then the only other thing I would say is as you're coming through Tiananmen, I know we were there with a tour, and our tour guides before we got there said, if you have questions about the politics and things, I can answer them for you. This is not the place to ask them. There's some sensitivity to some things that happened at Tiananmen Square that you will not be able to find if you're Googling from China, for instance. And so that's a place where you want to be a little more circumspect, potentially, about some of the history, especially the protests that
you're looking
had
at the older history at that point.
Yeah, the older history is great to talk about there. It's some of the more recent history that's probably not a great place to have that discussion.
That's right.
Excellent. So you took us out the back door of the Forbidden City. Where are we off to next?
Immediately when you come out that northern gate, there's a place called Jingshan Park.
Mm-hmm.
And I was surprised preparing for the podcast. I looked up online in a guidebook. Jingshan Park kind of rates quite low, or it's not mentioned much by anyone, which is surprising because it's a really cool vantage point. So Beijing is a very flat city. It's on a big open plain.
Mm-hmm.
Jingshan Park, it has a hill called Coal Hill, and that was actually constructed from the earth that was dug up to create the moat around the Forbidden City. And what the thing to do is to climb up that hill, and you can get 360 views of Beijing. And, of course, the best view is directly to the south, which overlooks the Forbidden City. And you can see the symmetry and the alignment of the whole complex from the northern to the southern end. And you can see Tiananmen just to the south of it. So I really recommend going into Jingshan Park. If you want to go in the morning, all over China, if you go into the parks in the morning, you'll see people singing and doing possibly dances and interesting exercises, the older people. And Jingshan Park is no different to that. So I really recommend seeing Jingshan Park, especially if the air is clear. It's absolutely fantastic. If the air is polluted, then it won't be as spectacular, but check it out.
Well, and it seems like that'd be a great place to get the idea of the scale of the Forbidden City, which is like about a kilometer by a kilometer, I think.
Yeah, because you don't get that overview. Beijing is not a place that has a lot of high-level vantage points. Like Shanghai has the Bund and Pudong, and it's all about those views. But Beijing, there's some places in the CBD you can go up to.
Central Business District.
Yeah. Around Forbidden City, there's only really the Jingshan Park Hill. So I was really surprised that that's not more mentioned. Just while we're talking about vantage points, for Tiananmen, there's not a lot of places you can get up and have a look over it, but one little place, a little tip is Muji Hotel. So Muji is a Japanese little department store. I'm not sure you have it in the US.
I don't know that one.
Okay, but they've interestingly opened a hotel. I don't know, I think this is a new thing by them, but they've just opened a hotel to the southwest of Tiananmen. And on the top floor, the 5th floor, they've got a restaurant and little terrace area. That gives a great view of from the south to the north of Tiananmen, which is hard to find elsewhere. So when we went there, we had to have a booking and all that because they'd recently opened. So I'm not sure how they treat walk-ins at the moment, but it's worth a try. If not, even making a booking for that view is pretty cool. Not one that's easily found.
Excellent.
That's the Forbidden City in Jingshan Park. So,
Konnichiwa, I'm Yuki, a tour leader with Explore. Who knew that hidden among Tokyo's towering skyscrapers was a peaceful tea house surrounded by ancient trees and serene ponds? Actually, I knew. It was my mother's secret sanctuary. Not everyone knows about Tokyo's Hamarikyu Gardens. Arigatou gozaimasu. But you will if you explore. Search exploreworldwide.com and don't just travel, explore.
If you've got those bagged, that's a big one. And the next one, obvious one, is Tiananmen Square. So if you've gone in the front gate, like you mentioned, you did, and you see Mao's portrait, immediately to the south of that Tiananmen gate is Tiananmen Square. And there's a gravity to that area. It's a big open area. Mao's mausoleum is in the center. It feels like something being there. You really do feel something's going on right there. If you're looking to the south, so to the north, you're looking at the gate with Mao's portrait. If you look to the south and look to the left, you've got the National Museum, and to the right, you've got the Great Hall of the People. The National Museum, really worth going to. Very great collection, especially I think it's the basement or the bottom floor has chronologically ordered pieces right back through China's history and really well done. The other pieces or exhibitions I really like are like the Buddhist sculptures from different periods, especially the Song dynasty has a really distinctive style, really beautiful. And Chinese ceramics are famous. And you look at these pieces over 1,000 years old or 2,000 years old, and the simplicity but the beauty of them I just find gorgeous. I really love that stuff. So definitely check out National Museum. If you only do one museum, that's the one for sure.
And before we leave Tiananmen Square, now when I was there, there were great big, huge video screens in the middle of the square showing scenes of China. I have no idea if that is something that happens normally or if that was just there when I was there.
What time of the year was that?
I was there right around Golden Week.
Okay, yeah. That would be the reason. So around the big major holidays, so there's the Chinese New Year, which depending on the lunar calendar can be from late January to mid-February. They'll have different things displayed or big sculptures of things or the big screens like you mentioned. Past in October, we had the national holiday and the Mid-Autumn Festival Week, and we had like a big, enormous teapot structure built out of flowers. So,
okay.
Which was cool, and a big portrait of Sun Yat-sen,
okay,
the former president of Republic of China. So, yeah, different things will pop up there depending on the holidays, and it's a place where all of China kind of has to visit sometime in their life, and you feel that when I spend most of my time in Beijing, not in that area. And when I go to these kind of areas, I feel like I'm meeting the rest of China. You know, the people are different because they're not Beijingers. They're not living and working in Beijing. They're tourists. And you really feel like you're meeting people from all over China. So it's kind of like a pilgrimage in some way. So, yeah, you'll get that sense.
Relative to that, thinking of the big holidays that you just mentioned, is that a good time to go to Beijing because everybody leaves the city, or is that not a good time because everybody elsewhere in the country uses that as a chance to come visit Beijing?
That's right. So, yeah, people do leave. Everyone goes back to the hometown, but you're exactly right. There's a big flow the other way, and all those big sites will be packed.
Okay. I know it's a difficult time to get train tickets and those sort of things because everybody's in motion.
That's right. So, yeah, you could still make it work if you plan ahead, but yeah, it's probably better to come outside those times. Just avoid super crowds and kind of make travel around China easier.
Excellent. Well, you were heading south from Tiananmen Square when I stopped you.
Yep. So we're still in all the same area, and everywhere we've talked about is easily walkable. So although it's a very broad area, but it's all flat, it's all quite open. You'll easily walk around this area. So immediately to the south of Tiananmen Square is a place called Qianmen, and there's two big gates there, Zhengyang Gate, or Qianmen, sorry. So Men, when you hear Men, that means gate. So Qian Gate, Tiananmen Gate. The Qianmen represented the end or the southern boundary of the old inner city. Beijing, as you see now, all the old stuff is within what was the old inner city, and the inner city was bordered by a city wall. The city wall is like you can still see in Nanjing. I heard a podcast on Nanjing last year, and Xi'an has still got the wall there. Beijing had one exactly the same. It's nearly all gone. There is a little bit of a remnant left near the Beijing train station you can still see and walk on.
I did not know that.
That's cool to see. There's a big tower still attached, and it's quite near the observatory, which has a little museum there about the different European astronomers that came and were courted by the Qing dynasty and whatnot. That's worth seeing especially if you don't get out to the wall. That's a nice little remnant to see, and there's a nice little park alongside it. So just talking about the wall, to get a sense of where that was, you simply look at the subway line 2. That is a circular subway route, and it's also matched by an above-ground road, second ring road. That basically tracks the old city wall. So if you're inside there, you know that that's where the older city was. So Qianmen is the southern end of the old city wall, and you pass south through Qianmen or past Qianmen into Qianmen, which was the old outer city. So this is a little bit of the history of the inner city. Was basically the ruling class, the administration, different departments of the government, the elites, the bureaucracy, and the noble people. They lived inside the city. Outside the city, as always happens around the world, the populations grew up around the walled city. To the south was a big built-up area, and that also had a wall erected around it. That extra wall, this is in the 1500s, they were going to build that around the whole, another enclosing ring wall around the whole of Beijing, but they ran out of money. They were fighting people in the north, so they didn't have enough resources to complete the wall. So that became like an appendage on the southern end of the old city, and that was the inner city. In the Qing period, which was about the last 250 years before the collapse of the empire in 1911, it was the Qing were actually not ethnic Han Chinese. More than 90% of China is Han Chinese ethnicity. The Qing were actually Manchu from Manchuria in the northeast of China. They're people with different language, with different writing script, very different culture, and distinctive head, the cues, the distinctive head styles, hairstyles, and all of that culture was actually not Han Chinese, that was Manchu. They lived in the inner city at that time. So the outer city to the south was actually known as the Chinese city, because that's where the Han and the Chinese population were. So when you move into Qianmen, it's now a big walking street running north-south, again in that north-south trend, south of Qianmen. And it's very busy. There's a tram that goes up and down just like there was in the early 20th century. It's a tourist place. You'll get a lot of Beijing snacks and restaurants and old shops and things like that. And in the morning you can go there and it's not that crowded, so you can kind of escape the crowds there. But in Qianmen, I really recommend walking off either to the east or the west, so left or right from the main walking street. If you walk several hundred meters, you'll end up hitting the quiet alleyways and hutongs, small areas, and you can escape those crowds and get lost in those little alleyways. I really recommend doing that around Qianmen.
Well, and my impression is that the hutongs, the smaller, quiet alleyways, a lot of those are being redeveloped and are going away.
There's a long history, ever since modernization of China after the Qing dynasty fell. This has been an ongoing process of how do we modernize China, and this has continued up through the Communist Revolution and into the present day, and there's different waves of redevelopment. For example, during the Olympics time, there was a big push to redevelop a lot of areas, and the big opera house, which is beautiful, called the Egg, which is further to the west of Tiananmen.
Okay.
That apparently took out a lot of the hutong areas. And more recently, there's been a big push to sanitize and clean up a lot of the hutongs, which there's two views of this campaign. If you ask local people that actually live in the hutongs, they're like, this is great, things are being cleared up. We've got so much more room and everything's tidier, and there's not so many people selling things right on our doorstep and building shops where they shouldn't have shops, and all those things being cleared out. So they're like, this is fantastic. Cars are being limited to go in there. Things like air conditioners are having nice covers put around them to match the style of the brickwork of the old hutongs, which looks fantastic. The other side of the argument is that some of these places are losing their soul a bit because all the shops and the little businesses that were thriving in these areas have been pushed out, and you're getting shops bricked up and things are changing a lot. I don't know where I come down on it. I mean,
I don't think I need to have a position there. Just It's something that people should know is happening, I think, is where I come down from a tourism point of view. And so that probably means if you're heading there in the next few years, that's something I would probably check out.
Yes.
Or do a hutong tour or something that's going to get you off the beaten paths and into some of those little alleyways.
Yeah, and I may as well just talk about that now. So that's one of my top things I recommend doing is make sure you get lost in the hutongs.
Which is not that hard to do.
Yeah. The best way, I think, to do that is to pick 2 points on the map of interest. For example, a good one would be the Lama Temple and the Drum and Bell Tower. And start walking and go into a hutong at an alleyway and turn left, turn right. But as long as you're going in the general direction, you'll get there. If you need a map app on your phone, you'll get there, no problem. But it's the best way to see them because people live in these hutongs, these alleyways. They're one story. There'll be grass growing on the roofs. There'll be people playing mahjong in the street if it's warm. There'll be a dog running around. You might be lucky enough to see some homing pigeons, which is a popular Beijing pastime, or people with singing birds in cages. It is really pleasant because you can be in this bustling, busy main street and then you walk 50 meters, even 100 meters, and suddenly you're in this quiet little alleyway. You would never guess that there's this metropolis around the corner. So really recommend that. There's many areas of hutongs, so just pick a few different points and walk between them. Really, really worthwhile. I guess we can jump back to a couple of big sites again.
Sure.
The Temple of Heaven is not very walkable from where we've just been. It's to the southeast of Qianmen. But I really love the Temple of Heaven because it's kind of different style to everything else you'll see. It's a circular, very symmetrical, simple, beautiful design, several-story cone shape. There's a big park around it. So again, if you go early in the morning, you'll see people enjoying the park like you see in China with different activities. So I do recommend the Temple of Heaven. The next one, Summer Palace. I haven't been here in a long time. And when I went there, I wasn't that enthused about it. I might have been in a bad mood or just seen too much of that stuff. But maybe some people will be screaming at me saying, what are you talking about? This is the highlight of Beijing. So just put that out there. But it's a big open expanse of gardens and temple complexes and buildings with a big man-made lake, and it's all centered around that. Quite pretty. There's some relief. There's a famous bridge with beautiful arches.
Now you're up in the northwest part of the city.
Yes. So that's why it is beautiful, and it's a very classic Chinese view and complex. But for me, if I've seen a bunch of other palaces and temples, I might not be willing to spend the time to get out there and walk around in the crowds. But I don't want to dissuade from people going there, but flagging it, that might be the case. Did you experience there, Chris?
No, we didn't go to the Summer Palace. The only thing I can think of that we went in the northwest part of the city, I don't even know where we went because we were with a friend who lives in Beijing, and he took us out to an area that is mostly restaurants around a lake with a lot of people singing American folk songs and things like that.
Okay.
I don't know where we were, so.
Okay. I think that would have been Hohai and Qianhai, so which is not far from the Drum and Bell Tower.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Yeah.
We were further in than I thought. So you mentioned the old part of the city surrounded by the subway line number 2, and I think you sent me a map that says that whole area is about 3 and a little bit miles square.
That's right, 3.3 north-south and about 4 east-west. So when I say the old city, it's not like if you just get off one of those subway lines and you walk out, you'll be in beautiful old hutongs. A lot of it has been redeveloped, and you could be in a place that looks exactly like outside of that area. But if you're looking for those older parts, they will be within that area. So something that's a bit about the layout, I feel like Shanghai, you get a better sense of where you are. So you can be in the French concession and you feel like, okay, this is a neighborhood. I could live a life within these few blocks. It's a lot like New York. Manhattan. You know, you can be in this enormous metropolis, but if you go to Greenwich Village or Soho or Alphabet City or something, you're like, okay, I can feel this sense of place and where I am, and people live their lives within a few blocks. In Beijing, it can be a bit disorientating because you've got that older part of the city, which is still quite large, but it's spread out along that north-south axis, and you can kind of be confused where you are, even if you're hitting all those sites. It can disorientate people. I was definitely disorientated for a long time coming here. So that's why I really recommend just trying to walk the length of that older part of the city, for example, from Lama Temple through to the Drum and Bell Tower, down past Hohai where you were around the little lake, down to Jingshan Park, around the Forbidden City, Tiananmen, Xianmen. That's a solid walk. You know, I think it's 6-7 miles or something like that. But you really see those areas in the context of each other, and I think that's really worthwhile.
No, that sounds good.
So I'm going to jump out of the city for a moment to the Great Wall. Beijing, the Great Wall, as we know, goes for many thousands of miles, but Beijing is a fantastic place to see it because it's quite close to the city. The area closest is around an hour and a half's drive, depending on the traffic. That would be Mutianyu, which is beautifully restored. It has, if you're not into hiking up a hill, it's got chairlift, like a ski lift thing, and a toboggan down, so it's quite accessible.
I took the toboggan down. My wife was leery, and so she did not because she was afraid that in China that they might have less safety concerns, although I thought it was very well monitored for speed and things. And, and she was tired for days afterward from doing the walk up and the walk down. So do the toboggan. It's touristy, but it's fun.
And it's a novel thing. You know, you don't expect to see that on the Great Wall. I was just looking up online, you know, what people were saying about where to go on the Great Wall, and Badaling is the very famous site where...
And that's closer than Mutanyu, isn't it?
It's actually further away. It's in the northwest.
Okay.
And President Nixon visited there, President Reagan. So it is famous. I think it was probably one of the first areas to be properly restored. And it's quite beautiful. I've never been there. I've only been to Mutanyu. But people talk about, Mutanyu is so less crowded, less touristy. I don't think that's a very good way. If you go with that impression, you'll be disappointed because there's a lot of people there.
Right.
It's all relative, right?
Well, and the other thing I would want people to know is we talk about the Great Wall. In that particular spot, there's a lot of hills. In some places, the Great Staircase of China. And so just know this is going to be something that is going to put some stress on your knees and not something that you're going to get a long distance if you have mobility issues, for instance. This is a hike.
It's a sudden big hike, too. It's not like a wander. It's like, okay, we go up now. you know?
But you have to see it. I mean, it's amazing.
But one thing I really wanted to mention about the Great Wall is if you have the fitness to do a hike, I really recommend taking a day out and doing a hike along one of the areas around the wall that's not restored. So the wall's huge and there's special spots that have been restored which are beautiful, but that's just a fraction of the total, and a lot of it is either half broken down or various states of falling apart. Some will have trees and shrubs along it. Some of the railings will all be gone. Others will look quite close to what it was. But these hikes, I've done quite a few of them with a group called Beijing Hikers. It's a really excellent group. That others do it as well, but I haven't been with them. But Beijing Hikers has a great website. It'll tell you really good details about the distance, the elevation you need to climb on that route, how hard it is, and photos of past hikes. They're really well organised, so I really recommend them. So you'll go out in the morning, you'll get dropped off by the bus and hike up to a point on the wall. You'll walk along. You'll stop for snacks that you've brought and enjoy the wall, and then at the end of the day, you'll walk down and get picked up at another point. Often there'll be not many people around, if any at all, depending on which section you're at. And it's just a different sense. You know, you're passing through the landscape on the wall. It's like being on a castle, walking through the the environment. And I really recommend that. If you're up for it, please give that a try.
Well, I know we have an article on the site that Barry Kramer wrote for Amateur Traveler talking about going to an area by a reservoir called Huanghua Cheng.
Yeah.
And that is a place where you can see that at places the wall just kind of goes away. It crumbled into nothing. That is relatively close to Beijing, as I recall. I was trying to find it on a map here.
Each part of the wall has its own character because it was built by different generals at different periods. So they all had a slightly different style depending on the era and who was building them. And also the landscape changes quite a lot. You can have broader hills. You can have very steep, craggy hills. It's not just one thing. And, you might want to see the very beautifully preserved area, which is totally reasonable. And there are hikes that are run which pass from the unrestored to the restored. So, for example, there's one from Jiankou to Mutanyu. So you see like a bit of unrestored and you end up, you can go down the toboggan at the end. Or
Okay.
Gubaikou to Jinshanling is another one that's like that. So, yeah, just look at the sites and you can kind of choose what you want to see. My favorite one that I've done so far is called the Great Wall Spur. I just think that's a really picturesque one, really beautiful. That's my favorite. If you get a chance and you're here in winter and you get a dump of snow, that is a fantastic time. Snow is quite rare in Beijing. Usually you just get a bit of a dusting and it doesn't really stick around. But in the hills, you've got a better chance of there being a bit more. It's still quite rare, but it's absolutely beautiful up there if you've got a dump of snow. So definitely try and do that.
I didn't realize snow was rare. I mean, in a place that is literally named, Northern Capital, I thought there would be more snow.
Yeah, it's quite dry in winter. Last year we had a very late flurry in February, but apart from that, there was hardly any. Just on the Great Wall, quickly, if you're here while a camping trip is running, I'm not sure if that can be arranged privately. They may be able to be, but I know Beijing Hikers runs them not very regularly, but they do them through the warmer months. Overnight camping on the wall, this is a really special thing. I really recommend doing it. If you can handle sleeping on a very thin mattress in a tent on the hard ground, it is a really cool thing to be up there at sunset and then wake up for sunrise and be on the wall itself. It's a very unique experience. So keep an eye out for those tours.
Excellent.
Okay, so jumping back to the city, Lama Temple. This is probably the biggest temple in Beijing that you'll see. It's Tibetan Buddhist style, so Gelugpa sect. Qing dynasty, so the last dynasty in China, were very big fans of Tibetan Buddhism, so they set this one up, supporting that sect. The main piece of the complex is a 60-foot high Buddha statue carved out of a single piece of sandalwood tree, and it's huge. Read that it took 3 years to be transported from Tibet, and I can't imagine how they did that over what must have been very little infrastructure or roads. So that's the Lama Temple, and again, that's the starting point. If you want to walk through the hutongs, you start from there. You go down Wu Dao Ying Hutong and then continue on to the Drum and Bell Tower. So jumping out of the older city, I recommend going to the CBD, so Central Business District, kind of the new area called Guomao, and you start at Guomao, you go up through to Sanlitun, and even Liangmaqiao is an area maybe not worth seeing, but it's an okay place to stay. In Guomao, you've got the Pants Tower, which is this...
The Pants Tower?
Yeah, so it's the official building of the national TV broadcaster in China. It was built just before the Olympics. I think it was finished just before the Olympics.
It looks like a pair of pants. Okay.
Yeah. So some people hate it. I don't know why. I love it. Every time I go past this thing, I just look up in awe. I really, really love this building, and I think it's worth seeing. So a good excuse to go to that CBD area. The best way to see it, across the road, there's a hotel called Hotel Jen, Jen. Attached to that hotel, there's a mall You can go up in that mall to the 6th and 7th floor. There's restaurants and a couple of bars there. You can sit out on an open area. Late afternoon, dusk, really good view of the Pants Tower and a good way to see the CBD there. So around that area, another good thing, you can walk up to a place called Parkview Green, which is a mall, won a lot of awards for environmental points on how it's been built. What's cool about this mall is it's full of private art collection of big sculptures and contemporary things like that. They have some permanent things that you'll always see, but they do have rotating pieces, and they have a few small galleries within the mall. If you're going to go to one mall and walk around, that would be a nice one to do. They've got pieces by Dali, an enormous cast bronze or something right out the front. So international and local artists. So that's one thing to check out.
Well, I should just clarify something, because I think I know what you meant. When you say rotating exhibits, you mean exhibits that come and go rather than
Kafka.
Rather than Kafka's Head in Prague.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Right.
That's what I thought you meant, but I just needed to clarify.
That's right. So kind of in this similar area is the main entertainment restaurant bar area called Sanlitun. Sanlitun started its life because this area has a lot of embassies and consulates, so a little garish bar street popped up, kind of like the Chinese idea of what foreigners liked to have as a bar.
Okay.
That was big in the 90s, and there's still a strip that remains there. You can see it just on Sanlitun, Beilu. So that was like the seed of this area, and then from that, enormous big walk-through mall complexes and department stores and hotels have all sprung up around it, and it's basically now the main place to go and eat and go out in Beijing. It's worth going to. I really think in terms of food, you might think, okay, I should go to the old part of the city and eat local food. But to be honest, you'll get a lot better variety in a place like Sanlitun, because places like Taikoo Li, which is a big shopping area, Nali Patio, Top Wind Center, a few other areas around there, they're full of restaurants, basements of departments, malls and things like that, and around. You can get a bigger variety there from all over China in a very small space. That stuff does exist elsewhere in Beijing for sure, but it's kind of all spread out. There'll be a restaurant here and a restaurant there, and you kind of have to go on a big trek to hit them all. So definitely keep that in mind, because that's not something kind of people think about, because they think, okay, the entertainment area, it's just all Western food and bars. But no, it's good, really great Chinese food as well.
And are there recommendations for what or where we should eat while we're in Beijing?
Definitely. So the number one thing, obvious thing, is Beijing duck. There are a couple of big famous
formerly known as Peking duck, just like Beijing is formerly known as Peking. Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The main chains that are famous and still good quality are Chuanjude with a Q, Quangude, and Dadong, 2 words, Dadong. They've got locations throughout Beijing, and if you have a map app, just jump on there and you'll find a bunch of them. Apart from Peking duck, Beijing duck, the other local thing would be a hot pot, similar to Sichuan hot pot, if you've had that before, but not spicy, and it's in like a old brass conical type pot that was built to have like coals heating the soup, which you then dunk in your raw meat and vegetables and then take it out and eat it with like a dipping sauce.
Okay.
That's a Beijing thing. You won't see that a whole lot. You'll see it in Qianmen or a place called Huguosi Walking Street, which is a good place for Beijing snacks and Beijing food.
And we'll put links to all these places in the show notes for those of you who are trying to figure out what Daniel is talking about.
Another a really Beijing snack is cow stomach, just boiled or steamed, I'm not sure which.
Yum.
Served with a sesame seed sauce. So you'll see that in those kind of local areas. You won't really see it outside of the tourist areas so much. You'll also spot keep an eye out for candied hawthorn fruit, just like toffee apples, but hawthorn. You'll also see...
So this is more of a street food at this point. I'm looking for this in a vendor?
Yeah, you'll see them displayed on skewers on the street or in little shops. You should be able to spot them, as you will, like pot-set yogurt. So walking around a place like Tianmen, Hugosu, Bell and Drum Tower, Nanlo-Gushang, Hohai, you'll see these things. Pot-set yogurt, this is a very Beijing thing, little reusable pots that has Beijing yogurt in them. Drunk with a straw or eaten through a straw.
Okay.
And modern, last 50 years is Arctic Ocean soft drink. It's a very sweet yellow soft drink in reusable, just like the old glass Coke bottles. So these reusable bottles you'll see throughout these areas, which is a very cool old Beijing thing that you'll see about. So that's kind of street food that's Beijing. Beijing food's not that well known outside Beijing. You don't find a Beijing restaurant apart from Peking duck outside of Beijing. So when we talk about Beijing food, you're really going to have those little snacks for fun and then just try and enjoy all the cuisine around China.
Okay.
A few things that are popular in Beijing that have come from elsewhere are jianbings, which are like a big crepe on a hot plate with an egg cracked on it, a bit of meat sauce, a bit of lettuce, and a kind of crispy wafer thing wrapped up into like a kebab. And you'll see those about. Also,
well, one of the things that got the message across to me that we were talking about different cuisine up here in the north than I think of with Chinese food is as you're going out, for instance, to Mutanyu, as you're going out through the countryside, you're going past fields and they're cornfields. They're not rice fields. You've got corn and wheat and things like that in this part of China. It's not what I think of as Chinese food. So clearly my thought process is just too limited.
Well, that's a good point. And that reminds me to mention that I think the US is the same as Australia in that our big Chinese population waves
from the
back,
south.
Yeah, from Guangdong. So they brought their Cantonese cuisine, which can be sweet. It's not spicy generally. And that's very different to most of the rest of China, which uses spice. And so in the south, you've got rice fields, so a lot of rice-based dishes. In the north, you've got wheat, so you get a lot more noodles and things like that, breads. So that's a distinction in general, north and south, though. Definitely check out things like Sichuan. You probably heard, I think Sichuan cuisine's become more...
Well, that's my favorite cuisine, so...
Yeah, that's a well-known one outside of China now. Also, Hunan has become popular recently. I really like Hunan food. Yunnan, I was listening to your podcast on Yunnan the other day. You can also find a lot of those restaurants in Beijing. Shanxi noodles, so where the terracotta warriors are, that's the home of really good Lanzhou beef noodles. So Nuro Mian just means beef noodles.
Okay.
You can find those. Other things like chuar, Chuaner, it's pronounced chuar. Really popular Beijing thing. It's not from Beijing. It's more of a northwest kind of Muslim area food.
Okay.
Little shish kebabs of meat and vegetables, either grilled or cooked in a hot pot with spices and whatnot.
Got it. It's so which you would find in Xi'an and further west.
That's right.
Okay.
It's also very popular. And if you're walking around and you want to find chuar, you look out. The Chinese symbol looks like the number 88, kind of stretched out 8, elongated, with a line straight through the center across and then turned up on its side 90 degrees. That's chuar. You'll see.
I'm sorry, I'm just trying to picture that. 88 line through the middle, turned up. Okay. All right.
Yeah. So you see neon, like red neon signs in that character, and you see that all over the place. That means chuar.
If I got what you're saying, I put a line down the middle and then I have two horizontal rectangles, one above the other.
That,
Like the symbol for China, except with another box?
that's right.
Okay.
That's right. Exactly right.
like Zhong, the character from Middle, which I'm going to
That's
see all
right.
over the place. Okay.
And when you think about it, that's exactly what the try looks like. It's a spike, it's a skewer through a couple
Right.
of bits of food.
Okay.
So very practical. The other thing I just mentioned quickly is if you want to do weird food, so there's an area called Wangfujing, which is like a big walking shopping street, which I don't recommend going to unless you want to do this very popular side street, very crowded, but they have things like scorpions and bee larvae and sparrows that you can eat. And this might appeal to someone, so by all means, go and eat there, but you won't see that stuff. Oh, you see bee larvae elsewhere in restaurants, but you won't see scorpions. So that's the place to go for that. If you want to put stuff online and impress people with your eating a scorpion, that's the place to do it.
I don't feel the need for that, but okay. Anything else you want to talk about in terms of food before we get to some of our wrap-up questions? We have to wrap it up or turn this into a two-part episode. It's one or the other at this point.
It's up to you. So I'll just say jump on a place called Time Out Beijing, timeouts
sure.
around the world, or That's Beijing, the Beijing. They're great sources of Chinese food. You might think it's all for expats, but no, it's
Okay.
really great summary of local food. So use that as a resource for sure.
And full disclosure, I've been doing work for Time Out over the last year, but I did not encourage Daniel to say this. Okay.
No, it's a really great reference. I use it all the time.
Mm-hmm. And then you mentioned apps. You mentioned DD.
I'm just listening to the Shanghai podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't hear mention of VPN. So if you come to China and if you've got your local SIM card from home and you've got a good roaming plan, that's fine. You'll be able to access all your sites as usual. But if you're getting a local card or using Wi-Fi, you won't be able to get on things like WhatsApp or your
Facebook
Gmail. That could be a surprise to people. So definitely install a VPN before you come. So Google Maps will work with a VPN, but it won't without.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Apple Maps works well. And there's a function in there that you can go down and go open in a map, which will open everything in, after you've found the point, it'll open the address and the name in Chinese. So that's the way to show local people they'll always get it. And even if they don't know where it is, they can type it into their own phone. But definitely do that. I don't know for Android. Subway's good, works well. Try the DD Chuxing, which is the Uber equivalent in China. Works really well. If you select the taxi option, you can just pay in cash. You don't have to link your card.
And why do I think that DD comes from the name of one of your siblings?
That's true. That's younger brother.
It is
Exactly
younger brother.
right.
Okay, I wasn't making that up.
No, good memory. Good memory.
And then one other place that you mentioned at the beginning that you haven't gone into any detail on was 798 Art District.
Yeah, so this is a bit out kind of between the main city and the airport. It's an old industrial park that has been repurposed with galleries and studios, and there's a bunch of cafes and stores popped up there. It's a quite nice area to walk around if you're into that stuff. It may not be everyone's cup of tea, but yeah, it's worth checking out. And they have touring shows from international artists as well.
Excellent. And you mentioned airport. Beijing is opening a new airport, the world's largest, next year?
Yeah, and to the south of the city.
Okay, so the current one is northeast of the city. Am I remembering that correctly?
That's correct.
Okay.
So, yeah, the other one, an area called Dashing, will be open apparently from next year, 2019. So that's going to be a big deal, which is good because Beijing Airport is very busy. You can have delays coming in and out. Yeah, so looking forward to that.
Okay. It might also then lead to more traffic, which could lead to fare drops. So that would be something I would watch for if you're interested in going to Beijing. Is there may not be, but there might be some good deals next year. Excellent. Well, we need to probably start wrapping this up. You're standing in the prettiest spot in Beijing. Where are you standing? What are you looking at?
This is one I wanted to mention. Something to do, which people don't think about, is go to around the Forbidden City perimeter, so the moat at night. It's something I stumbled upon, and It's very empty. You'll see a couple of guys jogging, walking a dog, maybe even fishing in the moat, which is funny to see. And it's not particularly well lit, but you can walk the whole perimeter, and it's a very serene, not quite spooky, but it's a very cool feeling, especially in the warmer months. It's nice to walk around there. So very beautiful and completely different feeling to when you're there in the middle of the day with the rest of China. I definitely recommend that. And the other one would be on the wall, waking up, having camps there, drinking a cup of tea, watching the sunrise, for sure.
Well, one thing I do want to remind people of, you talk about wandering aimlessly, getting lost in the hutongs, or walking around the moat at night when there's not that much there. And some people are thinking that you don't do that in big cities. You don't walk by yourself in the middle of the night in places where there aren't a lot of people. But Beijing is a very safe city, so
absolutely, yeah.
And it's probably something we should mention. Yeah, like rest of China. Yeah,
yeah, totally safe.
Excellent. One thing that makes you laugh and say only in Beijing.
I was thinking about this, although it's not technically only in Beijing. You'll see it elsewhere in China, but every summer, local men will pull up their T-shirts and their shirts and sit them above their belly and just walk around casually, because that's the standard way to keep cool. And they'll just walk. They'll be in shops. They'll be just casually walking around like that's the standard way. And I just never fail to get a smile seeing that, thinking, okay, this is Beijing. This is cool.
Well, and you mentioned walking around like that in the summer, which probably indicates a good reminder that maybe summer is not the best time to go to Beijing.
Yeah, it can be very hot. This year was very humid and wet in the summer. Just be aware of that. So say from September, October, early November is ideal. Spring can also be okay, but you can get rainstorms coming in spring. So that would be, say, from April, May.
Okay.
It starts to warm up and be spring. Winter can be cold and windy, but it's usually dry. You might get in Celsius down to like minus 15 and hover around 0 or plus 5. But still doable in winter. A lot less tourists. You don't see so many foreigners on the street at that time, for sure.
Right. Well, and 15 is really just high 50s, so that's really not that bad at all.
Oh, that was negative 15.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
That's colder. Never mind.
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha.
Last winter it was like, minus 5 to plus 5, so it's quite mild.
Okay. All right. That's chilly. You got to have a jacket for that.
Yeah.
And if I asked you to summarize Beijing in just 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
I would say gravity, history, and change.
Yeah, change. The joke used to be that the national bird of China was the crane, and they meant industrial construction crane.
It is amazing. It's a cliche now to say, China's always changing, but it absolutely is constantly.
And we have done episodes. We've actually done 2 episodes on Beijing before, which one of them was similar to this episode, someone who talking about seeing it on your own. The other one is a very different episode for amateur traveler because it's talking about going to Beijing on more of a bus tour kind of tour, which we don't normally do. But I thought a lot of people would do that with Beijing. And if you go back and listen to those, you're going to hear something very different, because that one's going to go to the cloisonné shop and the jade shop and the such and such shop. And that's what you get on a bus tour. That's how they fund that. And so it isn't necessarily that I'm recommending that, but if that's what you're thinking about doing, listen to that episode and compare it to this one. And it's going to be different. So, but we wanted to do it again because, again, things have changed. The pants building, for instance, I had never heard of. So that was built since I was there. Excellent. Daniel, you don't have a travel blog that you want to promote, but you have a friend who has some Airbnbs around China.
Yeah, a good friend with a Chinese partner has got, I think, 4 now, 2 in Guangxi, which is around Guilin, 1 in Hunan, and 1 in Fujian province, all in very distinctive local village settings, very, very cool spots, beautiful local house style, eating local food. Just jump on Airbnb and look up Laojia, Laojia. They also have a website. you'll get a sense of those places. And if you want a really authentic in the hills feeling, this is the way to do it. I really recommend Laojia.
Excellent. And I'll put a link to that, but none of those are in Beijing. Just don't want to mislead people there. I want to make sure that people understood that. Excellent. Well, Daniel, thank you so much. Our guest again has been Daniel Rickleman, who is living in Beijing, and thank you for sharing with us your love for Beijing.
Thank you, Chris. Welcome to everyone to Beijing.
With that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. Remember the trip that we're doing in May of 2019 to Africa, and go sign up for that. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more cathedral. I got to sit in one more cafe. I know that I should